The studio of The View buzzed with its usual electricity that morning. Camera operators adjusted their lenses, producers shouted final cues into headsets, and audience members fanned themselves under the warm glow of the overhead lights. But today had an edge to it, something in the air felt charged. Even the crew knew this episode was going to be different. The guest was Denzel Washington, one of Hollywood's most respected figures, a man whose calm, grounded demeanor carried more power than most actors' loudest performances. When Denzel walked onto a set, people listened. Backstage, Joy Behar sipped her coffee, flipping through her cue cards with that familiar smirk she wore when she was about to stir the pot. She loved mornings like this, live, unpredictable, and a chance to push a conversation right to its breaking point. That's what made The View work, a blend of wit, heat, and heart. And Joy had never been afraid of bringing the heat. When the theme music swelled and Whoopi Goldberg's warm voice welcomed the audience, applause thundered across the studio. The energy lifted even higher as Whoopi said, "Please welcome the one and only, Denzel Washington." The studio erupted. Denzel walked out in a sleek navy suit, his trademark smile disarming and genuine. He waved at the audience, shook hands with Whoopi and Sunny Hostin, nodded politely to Sarah Haynes, and offered Joy a courteous smile before sitting. His presence was magnetic yet unassuming. He didn't need to command attention, it simply followed him. They started light, as always. Whoopi guided the conversation toward Denzel's newest film, a gripping story about redemption and morality. Denzel spoke about the challenges of portraying flawed men seeking forgiveness, his voice rich and deliberate. "We all have something we're trying to make right," he said. "That's part of being human. It's what gives life meaning." The audience hung on every word. You could almost feel the collective admiration in the air, until Joy leaned in, eyebrows raised, tone playful but sharp. "You've talked a lot about your faith over the years, Denzel," she began, glancing at her cue card. "You've said God guides you in everything you do. But don't you think that kind of belief, absolute faith, can sometimes blind people? I mean, a lot of terrible things have been done in the name of religion." The crowd grew still. It wasn't a new line of questioning for Joy. She'd sparred with religious guests before, but something about her tone this time, dismissive and teasing, struck differently. Denzel turned slightly toward her, his expression calm but focused. He didn't blink. "I think faith," he said slowly, "is what keeps you grounded when everything else in the world is shaking. It's not blindness, it's clarity. The kind that doesn't come from sight." The audience reacted with approving applause. But Joy pressed on, tilting her head, voice rising just a notch. "But don't you think that kind of talk can be dangerous?" she asked. "We live in a world where people take those words literally, where faith sometimes gets weaponized. Shouldn't we be careful not to encourage blind devotion?" Whoopi shifted slightly, sensing tension. The other hosts exchanged quick glances. Denzel, though, remained perfectly still, hands folded in front of him. "Faith doesn't cause harm, Joy," he said in that slow, measured voice of his. "People do. Blaming belief for what someone chooses to twist is like blaming a hammer for the carpenter's mistakes. The tool isn't the problem, it's how it's used." That landed. The audience burst into applause, some even cheering. Joy gave a small, tight smile, clearly caught off guard by the precision of his response. Still, she wasn't ready to let it go. "Okay, but let's be honest," she continued. "You're in Hollywood. You've seen how people hide behind religion to excuse bad behavior. Don't you ever question if it's all just convenient?" Denzel's smile faded, but his tone didn't harden. Instead, it softened into something almost fatherly. "I question people," he said. "I question myself. But faith, no. That's the thing that keeps me honest, because it reminds me I'm accountable to something greater than myself. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of conversations today. Accountability." Applause rippled through the crowd again. Joy shifted in her chair, visibly uncomfortable now. "I just think we've moved past needing that kind of structure," she said, gesturing vaguely. "We should be teaching people to think for themselves, not to follow some invisible guide." That was the moment, the one everyone in the studio would remember. Denzel looked straight at her, and his voice dropped just slightly. "You're mistaking faith for control," he said. "They're not the same thing. Real faith frees you, it doesn't cage you. And thinking for yourself doesn't mean rejecting what gives other people strength. You might want to show a little respect for that." The air in the studio went electric. You could feel the shift instantly. Gasps, murmurs, then an explosion of applause so loud that it drowned out the music cues in the control room. Joy blinked, caught between defensiveness and disbelief. Her usual quick wit seemed to falter. Respect works both ways, Denzel, she said, a slight edge creeping into her voice. I'm just asking questions, and I'm just answering, Denzel replied evenly. You asked me about my faith. I told you what it means to me. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe that's not about me. Maybe that's about how uncomfortable the truth can be. A few audience members stood up clapping. The control room director's voice barked in someone's earpiece, cut to commercial. Now, but the moment lingered long after the lights dimmed for the break. As the applause faded and cameras went dark, the tension at the table hung like a storm cloud. Denzel turned to Joy, his voice low but steady. I respect you, Joy, he said quietly. I really do. But respect isn't just something you say, it's something you show. Especially when people talk about what matters most to them. Joy didn't respond. She looked down at her notes, lips pressed thin, her trademark composure cracked for the first time in years. Denzel leaned back in his chair, unbothered, and Whoopi let out a long exhale, muttering something to a producer off camera. The fallout from that live exchange between Denzel Washington and Joy Behar rippled through the studio like a thunderclap that refused to fade. The moment the credits rolled and the cameras went dark, the room erupted into a controlled panic. Producers swarmed the table, whispering hurried instructions into headsets while others ushered the remaining hosts off stage. The audience, buzzing with excitement, was still talking over each other as they were escorted out. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, something raw, real, and unrehearsed. Joy sat stiffly at the table, her arms crossed, her face frozen between disbelief and indignation. She had sparred with countless guests before, politicians, actors, even former presidents, and she'd always come out on top, or at least unshaken. But this felt different. Denzel's calm, unwavering tone had cut through her usual armor of sarcasm like a blade through silk. She could still hear his words echoing in her mind. Don't confuse cynicism for wisdom. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reprimand, one delivered not with anger, but with absolute composure. Joy, one of the producers said gently, approaching her. We're going to need you backstage for a few minutes. She blinked, turning toward him. For what? She asked sharply. I didn't do anything wrong. He sighed, trying to remain diplomatic. It's just a precaution. The network wants to regroup before the next segment. That's all. Joy's eyes narrowed, but she stood, muttering something under her breath as she followed him off stage. The moment she disappeared behind the curtain, the tension in the room seemed to ease just slightly. Whoopi exhaled deeply, shaking her head. I told y'all, she muttered to a nearby stagehand. You don't poke a man like Denzel unless you're ready for what comes next. Meanwhile, Denzel had already left the building. He'd walked out with the same quiet confidence he'd walked in with, greeting a few crew members on his way out, shaking hands, smiling politely. To anyone who saw him, he didn't seem angry or ruffled, just centered. The kind of composure that comes from knowing you stood your ground and didn't have to raise your voice to do it. Outside, his car was waiting. His publicist hurried alongside him, phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. You've gone viral, she said, half laughing, half stunned. It's everywhere, Twitter, TikTok, you name it. People are calling it the Denzel moment. Denzel smiled faintly, opening the car door. People love drama, he said. But if something good comes from it, if it makes them think, that's what matters. Back inside the ABC studio, chaos reigned. The executive producer, a woman named Marcy, was on the phone with network executives trying to contain the situation. No, he didn't walk off, she said firmly, pacing the hallway. He finished the interview. It just got tense. Very tense. But he stayed calm, he was respectful. Yes, Joy's fine. She's just cooling off. But Joy wasn't fine. She was pacing inside her dressing room, arms flailing, her voice sharp and cracking with emotion. Cooling off. I don't need to cool off. She shouted to her assistant. He made it sound like I attacked him. I asked a question. That's my job. Her assistant, clearly uncomfortable, nodded. Of course, Joy, but, social media's not exactly seeing it that way. Joy froze mid-step. What do you mean? The assistant hesitated, then handed her a tablet. This clip already has 3 million views. Everyone's saying Denzel, put you in your place. Joy snatched the device, scrolling furiously. Every headline screamed the same message. Denzel Washington puts Joy Behar in her place on The View. Denzel's calm destroys Joy's smirk. Joy crosses the line, Denzel fires back with grace. The video of the exchange had been clipped, captioned, and shared thousands of times. Underneath, comments flooded in by the second, some praising Denzel's composure, others accusing Joy of disrespect. Joy's jaw clenched. Unbelievable, she muttered. They're making me out to be the villain for doing my job. Across the city, in a quiet Manhattan hotel suite, Denzel sat with a cup of tea, watching the same footage. His expression was unreadable. He wasn't gloating or smiling, just observing. The clip played again, his voice calm, his gaze steady, his words cutting through Joy's sarcasm like truth through noise. When the video ended, his publicist spoke. You know, you could easily spin this into something bigger. Maybe a sit-down follow-up interview about respect in public discourse. People are eating this up. Denzel shook his head. No need, he said quietly. The point's already made. Sometimes you don't need to keep talking, you just need to mean what you said. By the next morning, major networks were replaying the confrontation. Good Morning America, Fox News.